looks like Craig is just all.
Yeah, Craig is online as
I did. I can't remember it now.
Did you have the Wi-Fi codes posted or something? Awesome, thanks.
Excellent. Okay, so we'll
Really small.
start it at 10:01 and call this meeting to order. Item number 2, adoption of the agenda. Would I like to move the meeting agenda be adopted? Moved by Dawn, seconded by Susan. All in favor? Any opposed? That item is carried. Adoption of the meeting minutes from November 7th. Would like to move that the minutes be adopted?
I made one note.
Oh,
It noted me as absent, but I was here even so I was late. So we're making that.
great. So that will be corrected. Did you want to make a motion to move that? Okay. Moved by Susan, seconded by Dawn.
Have a rhythm.
Anyone opposed to that? Okay. That will be carried as well. We have no presentation, so we're just going to move straight on to item number 6, which is reports, and 6.1 is the commercial truck parking strategy with Mitch, who's going to give us a presentation.
Right, thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Mitch.
I mean, it's, I'm going to, oh, thanks, it's full screen now. Okay, awesome. So I'm going to start off the presentation today with the purpose and the context, and then I'm going to walk you through our stage 2 community engagement. And then I'm going to introduce the draft strategy, and then I'm going to finish up with the next steps and the recommendation. So my purpose today is twofold. So first of all, is to provide an overview of our stage 2 stakeholder and public engagement feedback. And then secondly, it's to present the draft commercial truck parking strategy to you folks. So a little bit of background or context here, we're undertaking a 3-stage strategy process. And we're currently in stage 3, and you can see in black there highlighted, we're visiting committees today. So that's where we are. So I'm going to jump into our community engagement. So we undertook 3 kind of components to our community engagement. And the first one was we held a stakeholder workshop in a World Cafe format. For our online engagement, we used our Let's Talk Abbotsford platform. And then we also held some in-person open houses. So I'm going to jump into our World Cafe here. It was held February 28th of last year at the Legacy Ballroom. What an amazing facility. I love that place. We had 30 invitees that were attended, representing stakeholders that were identified in our stage 1 background research report. Now, if you're not familiar with the World Cafe format, basically how it is we have some facilitated tables. Here we had 6 because we had 6 emerging ideas. And so you kind of rotate through a timed amount. I think we had 15-minute sessions, if I'm not right. Jacob, is that right? 15 minutes? Yeah. And so we had those facilitated, and you rotated around and provided your input, and then we came back and then kind of talked that through as a group. So great event and a lot of good feedback from that. For Let's Talk Abbotsford, our online platform, it was open for 2 weeks. And essentially how this worked was like a virtual open house. So if you were away driving your truck in Florida, you could still engage in the open house. So the same proposed emerging solutions that were there to comment on were the same in person or online. So, and from that, we received 67 total responses. Now, our open houses were held April 24th and 25th at our Ag Rec Center. Very engaging. We had 150 that attended over the 2 nights, and we received 62 comment forms from that. So now I'm going to break down kind of in themes what we heard with regards to our 6 emerging solutions. So the topics are kind of along the top in the blue band, and then we have kind of our major themes. I'm going to kind of unpack this for you. So our first emerging solution was creating new industrial parking spaces by creating some truck parking minimums. Now, this was seen as a long-term solution. This is what folks were kind of told us, seen as a long-term solution with little short-term impact. Probably the reason is we're not building a ton of industrial right off, so it would be a little bit slower uptake on that. And then some believe that this would add or would potentially raise the cost of land. Our second emerging solution was to advocate to the province to increase our provincial rest stops and better use of provincial land for that. Here we had strong support for new and expanded rest stops for truck parking in convenient locations. And we had strong support for services in or near rest stops, such as, providing washrooms, refueling facilities, food, ability to have truck washes. So just, truckers were looking for safe and well-lit places and amenities, to park their trucks. You want to have it comfortable, right, and convenient. The third emerging idea was largely founded in a study that came from NAOP, Industrial Commercial Think Tank. And they had a study which talked about underutilized industrial land for mainland. And so we, moved this forward as an idea. What we heard from folks was that using underutilized industrial land was that there would be safety, security, and liability issues potentially. And that the costs and concerns for a industrial landowner might outweigh the financial benefits. So there wasn't super popular. Number 4, this emerging idea was focused around using city and senior government-owned land to park commercial trucks. Here we had kind of mixed support for this solution, and there was some opposition to using city-owned land as it was seen as subsidizing trucking industry. For number 5, this would be focused on using privately owned land along strategic road corridors. And here, this received the most comments and support, bar none. Like, we had a lot of comments and support for this. And what we heard from folks is that people wanted to, have more parking on ag land, with emphasis especially on the Fraser Highway and in Special Study Area B. And many, in fact, wanted to increase the number of trucks to be allowed per ag lot. So that was some of the feedback they received. And then also respondents wanted to use underutilized farmland to park trucks as well. Then our last proposed emerging solution was to use big box retailers or, for parking trucks overnight, not during kind of peak traffic time or peak use times, but off peak hours. And the concerns here we heard from folks was that, there'd be safety, liability, and lack of facilities. So that's kind of what we heard for engagement. Now, beyond that, we also got some additional input from folks. And so I have those listed there, the major themes. So first of all, one of those was using temporary use permits. So TUPs, we could potentially use those. That's what we heard. Also heard from folks that we could potentially park trucks on industrial streets with signage. You'll notice that as a theme later on. And we also heard from folks that we could create zones or land uses strictly for commercial truck parking. And then also, or heard that, subsidies could be created that would limit the price of truck parking per month. As we've heard, truck parking is fairly expensive. Not as expensive as further west of here, but still expensive nonetheless. So with that, we took 4 of those emerging ideas and made some minor modifications. We brought along one new post draft strategy, and we shaped these by the 3 kind of components of our Venn diagram here. So we looked at our background research. So what did we undertake and what did we find out during stage 1? And we also were influenced, by our community and stakeholder input that took place in stage 2. And then we also, this was influenced by our existing policies and plans. I'm going to lump in provincial mandates into that existing policies and plans section as well. So now I'm going to introduce to you the 5 draft strategies that we've presented to council and moving forward with. So strategy number 1 would be to reduce the amount of vehicle parking in industrial areas and introduce truck parking minimums. Now, this would see a reduction of employee or customer vehicle parking required in industrial zones, not other zones, just industrial. And essentially how that would work, it'd be, there wouldn't be any net loss, right? So we'd introduce the commercial truck parking spaces from the loss, from taking away from the customer vehicle parking.
So same lot size, just different in location.
Just exactly. You got it. And this could be implemented quickly and would be a good option for our short haul kind of local trucking industry. So strategy number 2 would be to advocate for provincial plans that address overnight truck parking and services on provincial land. So this would, see us continued advocacy with the province to include overnight commercial truck parking and services in transportation plans, and especially along Highway number 1. And this would also see advocacy could occur a couple different ways. So one would be through political channels like politician to politician level, but then also the staff to staff level planning efforts as well, right? So we can continue moving that forward. As we've seen in other jurisdictions, there are state-wide commercial truck parking strategies. We don't have a provincial one. Our third proposed strategy would be to allow commercial truck parking on non-ALR land on the Fraser Highway corridor. And this would see the city consider redesignating privately owned land outside of the ALR along the Fraser Highway corridor. And now this solution received overwhelming public support, and it aligns with the public's desire for parking in agricultural areas. Now, the Fraser Highway corridor has a high potential for truck parking. There's already authorized truck parking in the area, and there's the ability to have some servicing uses and move forward with that. Now, staff could create new land use regulations through the Abbotsford 2050 OCP update to help facilitate this. Now, our proposed strategy number 4 would be to allow overnight truck parking within regional commercial uses. So that's not those big box that I mentioned earlier, but it's part of our 6 emerging solutions. And so property owners with regional commercial land use designations could be permitted to allow overnight commercial truck parking. See just on the picture to the left or to the right there, a truck parking in a parking lot, right? If it's not being utilized, there's the opportunity to take advantage of that. Now, this would require just a minor text amendment to our zoning bylaw. And this could be something that could be implemented quickly and would once again be a good option for our short haul industry as well. So number 5, as I mentioned, this kind of came out of mostly from our engagement. So what we heard from folks, this would be to enable commercial truck parking on industrial streets. I'll get into a little more detail on this. So first of all, the city would explore allowing specific industrial streets for overnight commercial truck parking. So not everything, right? And it would be on select certain streets, be a criteria for that. And we'd run that through a pilot program for a certain amount of time just to see how that would work. Now, this was supported heavily by the trucking industry and has the benefit of requiring no new infrastructure land. So that's a key piece there. And to facilitate this idea, it would just take some administrative changes to our regulation framework at the city. So with that, jump into our next steps here. So right now we're engaging through Let's Talk. We have a questionnaire out. So if you've been on Let's Talk or on your Facebook over the last few weeks, you probably noticed we had a questionnaire out. If you haven't filled it out, please do pass it along to your friends. We've had a lot of feedback, but it's open until March 7th. So it's short. It's a few minutes of your time. It does not take long. And so once that's completed, we're going to share those results with council with the final strategy and an implementation plan for their consideration. So with that, I'll leave you with the recommendation and I guess open it up for questions.
Would anyone like to move the recommendation and then some discussion? Moved by Craig, seconded by Don.
Sure.
Great. And so comments, questions? Go ahead, Craig.
At the forum in the fall, it was disturbing, I guess, to hear how the industry is undervalued. This is an acute problem locally here, and we're working on some local solutions. But when you look south of the border, how they treat the trucking industry in general, with rest stops and places to park and all that, the trucking association really carried that message loud and clear. And so it's good that we're doing some things. I just drove by the Fraser Highway, one of those lots that's allows a number of trucks. And it's just a mud hole. It's just a mess. Like it's just
Because there's no regulation.
yeah, it's terrible. And so hats off to the city for putting some options forward. We got to do something to improve this industry that moves all our goods around. And
Comments or thoughts? Go ahead.
follow on Craig's, it's the provincial support for doing this stuff. What are they even talking about it, or is it more rhetoric? Are you hearing anything that, hey, yeah, let's try that rest area and this rest area as tests?
If I went through the chair, yeah, I mean, through our, Highway 1 planning efforts, there's definitely been a lot of conversations, to push truck parking forward. And from what I've heard from, just hearing our politicians, definitely advocating every chance they get to move.
No, I'm
that
just
forward.
wondering what the response back
Yeah, the
was.
response back, do you have any doubt on that, Heather?
I know that there's some specific ideas around truck parking, around interchanges, and they're still, we're getting as they're considering it.
So nothing. Okay.
Well,
No,
I'll take the positive.
No, that's me. That's me. The, and the ALC support doesn't make sense. That's why you took the ag land, parking on ag land off, I would imagine.
If I may, through the chair, staff did meet with the ALC and there was no support for that. So hence the minor modification, and we want to still be able to be in that area, but an area where we have the ability to control land use and things like that. So, yeah.
The, I have two more.
Go for it. Yeah, you can go ahead.
Owning property, it's me, speaking for me.
Okay.
If I had leased it to Costco and then Costco says I can approve, they're gonna approve parking there, it's gonna kick the out of my parking lot as the owner. Will part of your regulation clearly state that the landowner gets to give the final say whether they'll allow parking on it or not?
So if I can through the chair, it would be up to the landowner to do that.
So not the leasee.
So it would be, yeah, the landowner would have that ability to do that, to have that choice if they want to do. It's not something that we mandate.
Yeah.
But if someone wanted to do it, they would have that option to move forward with that. But yeah, you would need that commercial regional land use designation. So there's only a finite number of course, that throughout the city, and they're close to key transportation corridors, right?
I see that if the parking lots, so some parking lots aren't built very well. They're built for cars, not for trucks.
Yeah.
And I think that if we start allowing that onto ones that aren't built well, there's gonna be that liability as well. So I just think that what you're saying is if this goes ahead, that anybody who owns that land and is leasing it out, better have a clause in there that says, hey, by the way, I am approving, I have final approval for trucks parking. Okay.
Yeah.
And the Let's Talk, you had 67 responses on that first one.
Yeah.
Is that good, bad, or indifferent?
Well, compared to our second round, it's a lot less. The second round, we've had way more. Yeah, like we're into the hundreds.
Okay, so if we all at the committee distribute it somehow to our social media crews, that'll help.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Okay.
no. But yeah, it went out, you'd see it on Facebook and things like that. And we've had it open a longer period of time.
Yeah.
To try and really push that. But yeah, we've had a really good response.
Good.
The second round. Sometimes it takes a while to get a little bit of traction with projects, but yeah, for sure. If you have, your circles, please,
And some of us know media people.
Yeah,
It's a great one to get out into the
for sure.
general public.
For sure. Yeah. And it's, it's seriously a couple minutes of your time.
Of course.
Yeah.
What's the cutoff?
March 7th.
Let's talk.
Yeah.
Okay. I've just asked the chamber team to spotlight that too, because this trucking industry is really important. But Dawn's question, I think, is bigger picture. It's back to my comment about this is really a provincial matter, and I'm glad you guys are taking care of it, looking at some solutions locally. But it is a much bigger issue as the transportation network runs province-wide and connects all sorts of supply chains across the nation. So, again, I'm just wondering if there's some political avenues that we could showcase what you're doing and say, look, we need to address this across.
Yeah, if I can through the chair, I mean, yeah, it's very much a lower mainland, greater BC issue, but This is a council strategic initiative. And direction was to like, what can we do? You know, at least to help our local industry. Can we help the rest of the, you know, other jurisdictions? And, you know, obviously our actions and advocating for that to push it forward, at least that shows that we're trying to help the industry, right? So.
I'll send something up the flag at the BC Chamber Network because we're heading into policy season and see if another chamber has got a policy to put forward that we could maybe get Abbotsford to support that.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah. Lynn, I see you with your hand up. You have a question or comment?
Yeah, it's just a question about the parking along the highway and the provincial plans. We're currently experiencing other people parking RVs and long-term homes on these lands currently. So what is your, is enforcement of this for commercial parking going to be in part of your proposal, or is this going to fall to another group?
If I can through the chair, if it's provincially mandated land, it would have to be the province that would do any of that. All of our other solutions, it's obviously more municipal implementation. But that one, you know, highway number one, their property, obviously that would come from the province to have to deal with that. But a lot of that industry that we're kind of pushing for would be more for our long haul industry, not so much our short haul. So it's more, you know, people that are coming through the area, if they're coming from Ontario or Alberta, they've dropped a load, they need to stop somewhere because their log's timed and they need to, you know, rest or whatever. So a whole different thing. And so that would be more the province area for sure.
Does that answer your question, Lynn?
I'm not sure that was an answer. Specifically, even if the municipality is managing it, like along the Fraser Highway or whatever, if you start having people park their mobile homes and trailers in that land, are you going to do you have permission to move them, or is it just going to be another location where anybody can park there?
So if I can through the chair, if it's on privately owned land, that would be a different story, like along the Fraser Highway corridor. That would be under municipal jurisdiction. And if there was people that were not complying with the regulations, then our bylaws team would address that. So that would be, you know, municipal jurisdiction. And obviously it's a privately owned business. I don't know that would be the case, that you'd see that happening, because it would be fenced and lit and things like that. But for sure, our municipal bylaw team would be involved with any infractions or things like that.
But provide a little more clarity or somewhat?
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble understanding you.
Did that provide clarity? Is that what you were looking for? Are you wondering about agriculture land, like ALR land, like who's responsible for leasing if people are parking large vehicles and RVs on land that they shouldn't be? Is that what you're wondering about?
Well, so we have a rest stop fairly close to our house, and you can't stop there. It's already full with campers and trailers and people who basically live there because there's showers and services and things that they want there. So, you know, you can't even stop there to go to the bathroom. You can't stop there to get a drink of water. You can't, there's no room. My concern is that we create all this extra so-called commercial truck parking. It's not going to be used for commercial truck parking. And my concern is just who, as part of your proposal, how are you addressing the enforcement of that? Has this not come up before? Has nobody mentioned this in any of the talks? Am I the only one that is concerned about this? That's it feels like a hole.
No, if I can through the chair, so maybe I'll just use an example like Cole Road. Cole Road would be an example of a rest stop where there are people that are permanently camping there, right? That is provincial, you know, property. And so part of our second strategy was to advocate for that. But we also talked about advocating, not only for the parking, but for services and things there. So it'd be similar to kind of eyes on the street or eyes on the park through SEPTED. So if you go to the States, they have a number of truck stops that have private businesses there, so that there's an actual kind of use happening there, kind of after hours where it's quiet. So, you don't see any of that kind of different type of behavior happening where people are camping there. So that would be part of our advocacy, to that. But ultimately, it would be up to the province to police their areas. And then we would, kind of police any infractions and under our jurisdiction, just because we don't have that ability to enforce that on provincial land.
Some of the
Okay,
neighbors
thank you.
truck stops also have gate fencing, right? Can you maybe speak to that? Or the provincial, the new ones that they've been coming up with, the what that I've seen through my travels, I see they have fencing, they're gated and they're a little more enclosed, so that, at least for myself, I would hope that anything that's coming forward new might have some of those measures that would help with a little bit of that.
Yeah, through the chair. If you look at the one under the Portman Bridge, that'd be a great example that the province has just created, and it's fence lit. So, yeah, I mean, the province is moving forward with that. I don't know if there are plans to move forward with that on other areas, but it definitely is a model that works. So, I mean, any kind of advocacy could include that as well, both staff or politician level. So.
Thanks for bringing that up, Lynn, and I know that at the council level and with the mayor, he's constantly speaking with our provincial counterparts about the challenges that are at those rest stops. So something that we are continuing to have conversations with, but unfortunately, yeah, it's provincial land, so our powers are quite limited. Before going to Don, I know that Craig online has his hand up. I'll let you go ahead, Craig.
Great, thank you. No, I'm actually great point by Lynn. Actually, that's very valid. But I also was kind of curious that when we think about where your ideal hub or your ideal sort of location would be to address the trucking and parking solution, wouldn't off Highway 1 make more sense as opposed to Fraser Highway? Because I'm kind of thinking areas around Mount Lehman, where at the best of times you've got congestion there and bottlenecks. And if that's the area where you have private land where you would be directing a lot of tractor trailers, I could kind of see we're creating a bigger problem to address. And it's not like this isn't without precedent. If you look at the corridors between, Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa, Montreal, for example, like there's a model for truck stops that are purpose built for a long-term solution, that have parking, that have showers, that have food, have options for long haul, short haul. So I'm wondering where we're kind of leading. I was a little surprised, and maybe the small sample size in the 60s has something to do with that. But I was kind of surprised that there wasn't more support for a long-term purpose-built solution off Highway 1.
If I can, through the chair, it kind of boils down to a difference in our long haul and our short haul industry. So along the Fraser Highway would probably cater more to our short haul industry, where trucks are driving kind of locally for the day and then they need a place to park at night. So your owner operators. Whereas along Highway number 1, as I mentioned earlier, it's more your long haul industry that's kind of driving through. So there's two different needs. So we're trying to capitalize on both those segments of the industry, both short haul and long haul. And as I've said this before, but there's no silver bullet to this. So we've got 5 strategies to try and address kind of a whole range between short and long haul. So hopefully that provides you a little bit more context to those 2 strategies.
Just to add something, Chair.
Sorry.
So this is Heather. I'm community planning. I think I would respond that way by saying that advocacy to the province is definitely about Highway 1. So any of their lands along Highway 1, that's part of the advocacy piece. A lot of those lands are provincial. But for other lands that are municipal, we're looking at industrial lands for the most part. Right now, industrial lands are the ones where truck parking is allowed. But there's so many competing interests, you know, do we really want to have industrial, you know, give over our industrial land for truck parking? Or are we prioritizing it in some other way? So it's really trying to balance all of those things.
Does that help?
Yes,
Yeah. Okay. Good to hear. Any other, Don, you had another comment?
Got a question this time. Definition of truck is going to be very, very important in your bylaw. What is it? How are we going to define? Is it axle size? Is it weight? Is it GVW? Like,
Yeah, it's,
because to go back to Lynn's question, giant pickup truck with a big camper on it is a truck. So they can pull in there and they can rent that space too. So I just wanted to see if that's been worked out, what the definition of these trucks are going to be. And
sure, if I can through the chair. So currently in stage 1, we identified that as being a commercial truck with a GVW of 5,500. So yeah, that's kind of what we've been operating.
and a commercial license.
Yeah, and that's pretty standard across the, you know, trucking industry.
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, go 5,000, 5,500 kind of in that range, but that's where we're at. So.
Thank you.
But good question.
Any other questions or comments that? Yeah, it's, I guess my only question I would ask is the need, like, do we know how many parking, do we have an idea of how many parking stalls are short within just our city? Because I know these are great solutions, but I'm just curious how much of the need are we going to be able to fulfill if we carry out some of these things? And maybe more so, just to put it in perspective, that I think find that the need is much greater than I think we can solve within our municipality. To undervalue what you're doing, but do you have any numbers?
Yeah, no, unfortunately I don't have some data limitations on our end. So, but I do know that, you know, kind of moving forward as we move through into implementation, you know, I think we'll be able to better look at what we can provide in terms of spaces. So that we can add, but on the back end, in terms of knowing what we're short on, I don't have any information quantitative.
Perhaps that might be an area that chamber could work with there. I know the Township of Langley has been also very active with their truck parking strategy, so that could be some really powerful information collectively getting it together. But with no other questions, I guess we've got the recommendations. So all those in favor? Any opposed to the recommendation? Not seeing any, so that motion passes, and we'll go to item 6.2, the community plan update. Yeah, thanks, Mitch. We have Mr. Perry presenting this item.
Good morning. Right. Thanks very much for the opportunity to provide an update on the city's Abbotsford 2050 OCP update. We were last in front of you in April, just before we went out to the community in May to do engagement for stage 2. So I'm excited to share some of the findings of that engagement and where the new directions are headed as we are moving towards through stage 3. So I'll provide a quick update. Discuss the findings and where we're going. The presentation will touch a little bit on the OCP urban structure, just to set the context as a reminder. I know you all probably don't have the OCP memorized, but as I talk about changes, it's good to have that in mind as to what's the OCP look like today. Therefore, we can better understand what the new directions would influence. Touch on the engagement, get into the new directions, and then I'll summarize with next steps. So it's important to keep in mind that we're planning for the next 25 years and a future population of about 250,000. When we hit 250,000 will depend on a lot of different factors, both locally and internationally. But this is a long-term view. This project is really looking to build on the successes of the existing OCP and look at opportunities to improve the plan in today's planning context. The slide up on the screen right now is showing you the city looking from the south. The white line is the city boundary with the US border at the bottom. The black line outline is the urban development boundary, which is a key part of the plan and the overall urban structure of the city. And I'm going to touch on that. So just wanted to show this for reference. Importantly, I'm not sure what happened to our lettering.
It's just funkified.
Yeah, leaning over. The city really is two areas. We've got our urban area, and very importantly, we have our agricultural or farming areas, which make up 72% of the city's overall land base. So extremely important. We know each of those areas has its own distinct planning needs and engagement needs. And with that in mind, the city completed the AgriFresh planning process in 2022 that was very much focused on that area in green. So with this OCP update, we've shifted our focus back to the urban area. So as I mentioned, the urban development boundary in black is the key growth area for the city, with the outer areas really focused on agriculture. So I'm going to use the next few slides to provide an overview of the existing urban structure. And looking at the urban structure in the hierarchy of centers, the OCP aims to focus 75% of residential growth in mixed-use centers and existing neighborhoods, with the most intensive uses in that darker orange urban core. The remaining 25% is envisioned to be built out in our new neighborhoods in the recently completed McKee NP and the Augustin area, NP being neighborhood plan. The city center is envisioned as the heart of the city and the center of public life, and this is really the area that's expected to evolve into the most intensive development area within the city, with a diverse mix of uses, including opportunities for high-rise residential and employment. I'll go back a second. Another key element of the urban structure is the blue primary transit corridor. And you'll see this really is the backbone of the city in regards to coordinating its land use and transportation planning. Urban centers, these are secondary to the city center in terms of scale and intensity. They're connected to the city center by that primary transit corridor. And together, the city center and the urban centers are envisioned as for the most redevelopment and intensification of uses. Then moving out from there, the infill areas beyond the core, these envisioned under the existing OCP, increased gentle infill of smaller lots, single detached dwellings, duplexes, and detached suites. But I will come back to this later, because with the provincial changes, a lot of that original vision has changed. Then moving a bit further out, we've got our existing neighborhoods. These are large areas characterized by single detached dwellings and secondary suites. Supporting those are the neighborhood centers, 14 of which support the surrounding neighborhoods with a mix of uses intended to be serving the daily needs of residents and walkable as much as possible. And of course, lastly, for the residential component, we've got the new neighborhoods. And with the completion of McKee, we'll see these will be one of the bigger areas of development in the city. Our last greenfield area, really, the rest of it is inwards and upwards. And critically important to supporting residential growth of the city's employment lands, made up of mixed-use centers, commercial areas, industrial lands, and of course our agricultural areas, which I showed on an earlier slide. So recent provincial housing legislation changes are a major consideration for updating the official community plan. One significant change relates to Bill 44 that was passed in 2023. The city is now required to allow up to 4 dwelling units on all lots that were previously restricted to single detached dwellings or duplexes. There was a deadline in June that the city had to meet to update its zoning to meet this legislation. This legislation is broad reaching. It impacts approximately 22,000 lots within the city. It includes some lots that were actually envisioned for higher density than 4 units, which I'll touch on later on. And the city has taken the interim step to meet the legislation, but this OCP update provides an opportunity to look at further policy changes with the community and council as the OCP is reviewed. So very briefly, as part of stage 1, we looked at how are we doing, and I believe some of this was in the slides we presented when we were last in front of you. But overall, the message that we have seen through that research is that the existing OCP is working well. We're exceeding growth targets in the urban core and existing neighborhoods. And with the McKee NP now finished, we expect to see progress towards the growth targets in this area as well. We're also seeing good progress towards more commercial in our mixed-use centers. And we're very encouraged to see that if we look at the stats since 2016 and council approvals, there's a major shift towards diversifying the housing stock in Abbotsford. A lot of those new approvals for residential is in the multi-unit apartment, townhouse, and semi-detached type development, and with a much smaller proportion being developed as detached housing or single detached housing. So with that context, and apologies for going so quickly, switch gears to the actual OCP update itself. So the project, as you may remember, is organized into 4 phases. We moved into stage 3 at the end of November 2024. The next few slides will provide an overview of the stage 2 new directions report that was released in late November when it went to council. Council received the report at the end of November and directed staff to use those new directions to start stage 3 of developing new policy or draft policy. So the new directions report, importantly, provides an opportunity to report back to the community about what we heard in the stage 2 engagement. It's an opportunity to link that feedback or the feedback we heard to the potential changes that are beginning to emerge through the planning process. The report itself includes 5 sections supported by a full verbatim set of comments in the appendices. And starting with chapter 1, it's really reminding folks, what is an OCP? What is this project all about? I know this isn't the day-to-day go-to reading for everyone in the city, so we feel it's a good chance to remind people why this is important and why they should care about it and how it shapes our future. So that's a key component for the average reader. Getting a little more technical, the second chapter is really trying to link all of the recent changes and remind folks in one place how we are needing to adapt the OCP to many different changes in legislation, summarizing what those changes are and how the city is doing, addressing those through the OCP. Additionally, Abbotsford is part of the Federal Housing Accelerator Fund and has 7 key initiatives, many of which we're able to tackle and move forward through the OCP process. The asterisks on some of the topics indicate that there is already progress being made on those. It's not waiting for the OCP to be complete. So the third chapter provides an overview of the stage 2 engagement, outlining who we engaged with, how we raised awareness, what we talked about during engagement, and most importantly, what we heard from participants. We're happy to see that we had over close to 500 attendees at the open houses and over 300 online survey responses. And with those survey responses, we had a very large volume of opinions on the early ideas, as well as a high volume of written input, which was extremely valuable to understand why people liked or disliked the ideas that were being discussed. We got feedback through open houses at several locations throughout the city. Similar to the truck parking strategy, we also had a World Cafe with several special interest organizations, including members from the council committees. And similar to the truck parking strategy, in a lot of projects we do, Let's Talk became a valuable opportunity for those who couldn't make it to the events or wanted to think about it and then provide their input. So we had a large volume of visits, some very good volume on the feedback and participants for that. So in summary, on one slide, we're pleased to see that there was a lot of support for most of the ideas. 11 of the ideas that we presented had over 75% support, and the remaining 4 were still in the 64 to 72% support range. But beyond just understanding the level of support for each idea, as I mentioned, those written comments provided really valuable input for understanding concerns and helping us prepare the new directions that are outlined in the next chapter. So we are excited to share the new directions that emerged through stage 3. 3 key themes really emerged through this: refining the big picture of the OCP, recognizing that we need to increase housing affordability, diversity, and supply as best we can through city policy, and then thinking of beyond just residential growth, how do we support that growth and guide growth that we do see happening. So the new directions are organized under these key themes. Then we have the new direction, and then we get into the report about more detail around how we get there. So I'm going to go through each of these quite briefly, and I'm happy to come back to any of them at the end and chat about them and unpack them further. But starting with new direction 1, this is to update, the new direction is to update the vision to reflect the city's regional role as the hub of the Fraser Valley, and update our regional context statement and elevate the local economy from a policy that's within one of the other ideas to be its own big idea, recognizing that a thriving local economy is critically important and one of the main ideas or key ingredients of the plan. The second new direction relates to expanding and strengthening climate change mitigation, adaptation, and resiliency policy throughout the OCP. What does this mean? It means that we'll be looking at updating the GHG targets of the OCP, raising awareness of how the OCP addresses climate change and resiliency, and exploring opportunities through our DP guidelines or other tools to support climate change mitigation and adaptation. The OCP includes a fair bit of content and direction that does address climate change and adaptation. However, it's not as apparent, and we heard that through the engagement, that to make that easier to understand and really make it obvious what we're doing would be a benefit to the readers. The next new direction is to expand the primary transit corridor in consideration of regional transit, deployment nodes, and priority growth areas. So what we really want to do here is build on the successes of the existing urban structure, extend the primary transit corridor from Clearbrook out to High Street, and rethink the role of High Street given that it has a regional transit connection. Also exploring Clearbrook Road and Marshall Road as a high priority transit corridor that links the hospital and the large core area residential population south of city center to that primary transit corridor. So two new legs are being explored. We also, building on that, want to increase opportunities for housing, jobs, and economic development in mixed-use centers, corridors, and at gateways. So thinking about how we get there, one opportunity is to revisit the potential for urban center designated lands along that primary transit corridor. So our U District, McCallum, Historic Downtown, Clearbrook, and potentially High Street. Today, these areas are limited to 6-story, but the new direction is thinking about density bonus opportunities to potentially go beyond 6 stories. We do know that some of these neighborhood centers, urban centers have some flight path limitations. So that is going to be an important factor as to how high some of the buildings can actually go in these areas. Sorry, I should also mention that the density bonusing component is also something we committed to through the Housing Accelerator Fund, is to expand the city's density bonusing program. So this moves that forward. New directions also look at rethinking the low density 1- and 2-story commercial areas along parts of South Fraser Way and Clearbrook Road. Thinking about the opportunities these may present for 6-story apartment or mixed use given their locations along high priority transit routes. The hope is that this will spur reinvestment along the Clearbrook Road gateway to the city and help strengthen the link between city center and historic downtown. The new directions also think about increasing the height limit for neighborhood centers, neighborhood mixed-use centers from 4 to 6 stories to improve viability. We have seen some development in these neighborhood centers, but not as much as the plan had hoped. So we know 6 stories through some of the analysis we've been doing significantly increases the viability of seeing some change and some investment in these centers. These are very important as they're really the opportunities for local communities to walk or cycle or take short trips to their local stores and not have to go all the way to city center or some of the major nodes. Supporting that, we're also looking at other changes to support housing and economic growth, looking at the density for our urban 1- 6-story apartment areas. We've heard some feedback about ways we can improve that. And looking at height increase for hotel use from 4 to 6 stories. We have heard feedback that the viability of hotel use is fairly limited at 4 stories in our secondary commercial, and that we know with the building code allowing wood frame that there may be some opportunities to see more investment in hotels, particularly in gateway locations. An exciting new direction also being explored is exploring land use changes to establish a new mixed-use area between Mill Lake Park and the hospital, recognizing that this is a major employment node and the surrounding density and lands in this area are quite low density. So the idea here is to explore higher density mixed-use commercial and residential through either low, mid, or high-rise buildings, explore opportunities for a vibrant public realm, enhanced street from hospital to Mill Lake, and exploring the opportunity to better connect and complement with the hospital as a major destination and employer. Hopefully this will also help attract a labor force that can support the healthcare industry. We know we have seniors housing in this area as well, so there's a lot of great elements happening in this neighborhood, and there's a lot of potential to build on that. So this is considering improved transportation connections with that Marshall Road, Clearbrook Road primary transit corridor connection. But we do recognize we need to evaluate infrastructure needs, including collaboration with BC Transit. New Direction 6 looks at broadening OCP policy aimed at improving the supply of diverse and affordable or attainable housing options. So what this means is really thinking about how the OCP can help highlight the policy that is addressing local housing needs, look at options to support cooperatives and nonprofit housing, and explore policy that supports people experiencing homelessness and related services, and importantly, considering the city's housing needs report and the key areas of housing needed that have been identified through that work, and how our land use plan can help support that. So another big part of the housing affordability, diversity, and supply, I alluded to this earlier, is the small scale multi-unit housing. This is the provincial change that now requires up to 4 units on all single attached or duplexes owned properties. So in addition to looking at refinements to our existing SMU regulations, we're looking at areas where it might actually make more sense to do more than small scale multi-unit housing or 4-unit projects, such as townhouse or apartment. And when we look at these areas, we really see 3 distinct areas emerging. So this is that graphic I showed you earlier, but broken down into 3 areas. The outer area, which is our existing urban 4 and urban large lot residential area. This new direction looks at exploring more flexible typologies, such as garden suites or duplexes with suites, revisiting the maximum size of accessory units in consideration of property size, and considering what the subdivision minimum lot size should be in this new context. So we're taking a close look at the details of that, but really thinking about opportunities since the June 2024 changes. How can we increase flexibility further here? We received a lot of feedback about this through the engagement process, and this is the idea of how to add that flexibility. As we move closer in, we get into our first infill part of the city. This is what we're calling the peripheral urban 3 area. This is an important area for growth and housing diversity, and it has been for some time in the OCP. But we see this area, the infill area, emerging as 2 distinct areas: the periphery, which I'm showing you there, and then the core, which is further in and closer to Mill Lake Park. So looking at the periphery, we're thinking about enabling larger units, with more FSR, potentially more flexibility in typologies, thinking about ways to minimize parking in front yards to maximize street parking, street trees, and active frontages. So essentially the idea for this area would be to allow what was allowed further out from the city, but then build on that to increase the flexibility to allow detached, more townhouse type options, given that this area has long been envisioned for more intensive, gentle density intensive and gentle is probably a little bit contradictory, but more flexibility in this area that are closer to. We're good. Yeah, more flexibility given its proximity to amenities, transit services. Then moving to the core, recognizing that it's close to so many amenities, transit, and services, we're really, again, building on that outer area, allowing the flexibility to do what was permitted in those other areas, but thinking about if a project or a landowner or developer were to assemble a number of lots, providing the flexibility to do a more traditional townhouse type development where maybe the potential is greater than just 4 units per lot. We would be getting rid of the 4 units per lot after a certain lot size, and it would go into a floor space ratio type typical development scenario. So it provides that flexibility to start infilling on a lot by lot basis, but it also is giving that flexibility to do more. Think a little bit bigger in this area. With that think bigger idea in mind, we also recognize that there are locations within the city, particularly along major roads, where having single lot 4-unit projects on every property is probably not the best solution, given limitations of street parking on some of these corridors, other goals such as bike lanes, pedestrian connections, transit, and to have a number of driveway curb cuts is probably not the most conducive. So we are taking a close look at which arterials or major collectors that have bike routes and transit might be appropriate for something more than the small scale multi-unit housing that goes out into the broader community. Shifting gears a little bit, place of worship sites. We have almost 50 within our urban development boundary. And an idea that's emerged through the process is to think about how some of those sites that often have a mandate of helping the community might be able to also help our housing challenges in certain segments of the market, mainly non-market. So there's policy looking at opening opportunities for council to consider rezonings for non-market housing on place of worship sites. We're looking at it as a flexible opportunity, either build a standalone building separate from the place of worship, or if the place of worship needs to be rebuilt, there's an opportunity to make it a mixed-use building. And we've seen a few examples of these around the region. We know that thinking about more than just housing is important. So institutional, this new direction looks at improving policy guidance for considering new institutional uses such as schools, campuses, and places of worship. It looks at considering adding institutional to the McKee Village designation, broadening mixed-use institutional beyond just the city center and University Village, and then updating location criteria to guide consideration of new school sites and campuses as they come forward to council. Importantly, New Direction 12 looks at exploring and affirming OCP policies and land use changes that support job growth and the local economy. We've got a great local commute stat today. We want to hang on to that stat and minimize the distance people have to travel to get to work. But with a growing population, we need to be growing our job space as well. So industrial land is very important to job growth, but we are running out. And so we're looking at through the new directions to strategically consider the citywide implications of OCP land use directions involving the ALR land and really affirming the special study areas as priorities for future employment opportunities, but also acknowledging the emergence of agri-tech as an important component that is likely suitable in these areas as well. So these areas, special study area A and B, are already in the OCP, and this new direction essentially is reaffirming those areas as important for future employment. We're almost there, New Direction 13 of 15. This one, again, is thinking beyond just residential, but what is needed to support residential as the city grows. We're looking at ways to review and update park and open space OCP directions and policies in the context of new land use and growth patterns. So update mapping to better direct future parks and trails, exploring policy options to better align parks planning and with development and growth. Thinking about the environment, this new direction looks at updating and enhancing OCP guidance and tools for development near steep slopes, hazards, and natural areas. We have development permit guidelines in place for these topics already. Excuse me, but this is an opportunity to think about how we can improve the implementation of those. So how do we get there? We're looking at updating natural area DP and steep slope mapping to improve clarity and consider the benefits of identifying a more precise area of application. It looks at centralizing environmental and watercourse protection tools within the OCP in the context of provincial riparian area protection regulations. And it also thinks about how we may be able to update DP guidelines, development permit guidelines and exemptions for the protection of natural areas and steep slopes and for the more efficient implementation of these requirements. And lastly, the last new direction, again, is about more than just providing the housing, but making sure that we're supporting and guiding growth in a way that's going to create livable units. So we're thinking about opportunities to strengthen some of the development design guidelines, thinking about ways to encourage more ground-oriented units, try to get that parking in areas that are not going to impact the ability to do ground-oriented units or have other units looking into parking areas. So something more like what you see on the right instead of looking into a parkade. We're also thinking about, as an example, townhomes. So how do we activate that ground floor on the right instead of having a vehicle at the front of the property? Really thinking about maximizing that pedestrian interface. Thinking about how we can encourage the internal drive aisles to incorporate more landscaping. These are part of the neighborhoods. While they are technically private lanes or private streets, they do become part of the neighborhood, and to have them improve with time through landscaping would be an improvement. And that's just an example where you can see a strong connection between the unit and the street simply through the design of the building. So sorry, that was a lot to throw at you. This is the next step slide, and I'm certainly looking forward to hearing comments or questions on some of the ideas. But just to recap where we're headed next. We are right now preparing and testing new OCP policies guided by these new directions. We're looking forward to presenting those to the community and getting feedback on the draft policy. So taking these new directions to that more detailed level, changing colors on the map, coming up with specific wording, and then seeing where we fit the mark and where we might need to make adjustments, reporting that back to council, and then requesting direction to prepare the bylaws to make the actual changes. All of this needs to be done by the end of 2025. That's the legislated deadline, so there's no wiggle room there, which is probably a good thing. But yeah, we're looking forward to moving it forward and being back in front of this committee as we continue to move it forward. Everything that's been presented is available on the Let's Talk Abbotsford page. So if there's others in your network that you think would be interested in this, please direct them there. There's a subscribe button. They can be notified whenever there's engagement coming up or new documents available. The full report is available there, and yeah, it's a bit of a one-stop shop. So that concludes the presentation. I'd love to answer any questions or hear any comments.
There's no recommendations, so yeah, just questions and comments. Craig, I saw you.
I don't know where to start, but I'll start with some simple ones out of the gate. And I think Parm would support me on this one. Why doesn't the transit horseshoe go from, U District through City Center, High Street, all the way to YXX? That's such an important node for Abbotsford and connecting Vancouver and other areas to this, our system, our transit system.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. It is something we did hear through engagement, is that important connection north-south, especially if it's extending out to High Street. I think getting the primary transit corridor to High Street is one very good first step, and then we can think about how that connects longer term. But yeah, excellent point.
Or make the end, not High Street, make the airport. Yeah, let's negotiate once instead of twice.
I've been promoting this for at least five years since serving on the transit committee. You mentioned more density through flexibility on some of those lots in more of the peripheral areas. Does that mean changes to setbacks?
It would. Okay. Yeah, that's something we need to look at, and that's exactly what we're doing right now, is thinking about, okay, if we want to implement this idea, I go back to those sort of three distinct areas of the outer band, and as you get closer, we would envision as you get closer, those setbacks would likely be more permissive, reduced, recognizing that there probably won't be as much change in the outer areas. So the short answer is yes, we will be looking at what the right setbacks are to allow that to happen.
One more question and I'll turn it over to others. Love the innovation with places of worship, and I've seen some developments around that. Parking. How are you tackling that? They surely can't afford to lift the place of worship up and put underground parking. And you're adding more people to usually an already congested area, unless it's a rural scenario.
Excellent question. Yeah, we know a lot of these sites are very large and have a lot of existing parking that's used for a couple days a week or one day a week in some cases. We also know with non-market housing that the users may not have the same parking demand as a market housing component. So, but it's an important thing to consider. These sites will need to be able to prove out that it is a compatible combination and that parking can be adequately addressed for the scenario that's being proposed. The policy is likely to stay higher level, allowing the proposal to come in and make that case. But it's
I'm
it's
thinking
on
of
our radar for
places
sure.
that don't have, acres of parking. I'm thinking my colleague Karam from RBC is on one of our chamber committees, and he was sharing the woes of their mosque on just off Marshall. It's Sultan and Marshall. And yeah, like there's already parking problems in some areas, and so this could really exacerbate it.
Well, they may not apply for housing.
That's right. Yeah.
And they're gonna have to decide themselves.
Depending on their funding model and
Yeah.
what they're trying to do, there might be some sites that are just not possible, or the scale of the housing would have to be much reduced.
It's good. Thanks.
I think also the location, right, where there are religious institutes are all over the city. Some of them are in more locations that might work much better for students' projects than others. So it's gonna be a bit of a balance. Go ahead, Don, you had some.
I might as well follow on with Greg again. So the taxation of the housing that's going to be on these, I think that's going to be a hot topic. Because right now the taxation is different on those zones. If we move housing in there, is it going to be taxed at housing level? How is that going to be defined versus place of worship taxation? And I think that's going to be a real bit of a hot potato, but an important one that, fairness is everything. Has that been addressed or has it been discussed already? How's that?
Because we're at the high level concept stage of getting buy-in on these ideas, we have not dug into that. It's been on our radar as far as I've had the same questions as you, as how will this work?
Yeah.
But that is something we'll have to figure out as we move forward.
It's a wonderful proposal. If it's done right and is done fairly for other homeowners and other developers around. The densification you spoke of, is there going to be height restrictions through the transition? Is it, I'm looking at some of the pictures and you've got all these single family homes and then this new fourplex with accessory units that has been talked about. Are you going to be shading everybody around? How is that going to manage the neighborhood growth? I think that's going to be a bit of a hot topic as well.
Agreed. Yeah, it's a very good point, and we recognize that there are, and again, that's why this the one size fits all is not really what we're moving towards. We've got a bit of a one size fits all solution in the interim. It's quite modest, but when we think about how we might go further, we're really thinking about the local context, and that's a big part of that. Is which parts of the city might it be appropriate to do a taller building in the back versus a lower garden suite? And the short answer is, as you get closer to the core, we would envision some of those, similar to the setbacks question.
Yeah.
That some of the flexibility around height is it's gonna have to become more flexible as we get closer to that core, and that will come with trade-offs.
Do you find a more flexibility that's in the legislation and the regulations? Then there's just more confusion and argument from a developer or somebody who wants to do something rather than this is the definition, here's the checklist. Are we going to open ourselves up to a lot more conversation and frustration by not having clearly defined, this is the area, this is the space that you can build on?
Yeah.
Is there a follow-up to that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think our goal is to be as clear as possible, even if we are differentiating between areas. But to be very clear about what the land use is envisioning and what the options are. Not everyone may build to the full extent of the options, but to be clear about what's possible is one of our goals.
Just so you're not wasting staff time with applications that don't fit.
Yeah, and I think we are also looking at the role zoning can start to play versus having to go through a rezoning process to do some of these things and try to minimize the uncertainty, but also create the clarity that a zone would provide in allowing the small scale multi-unit housing options.
You kind of walked into my area of expertise, all this stuff. So that's why I have a few more questions, if that's okay, Chair.
Yes, you can.
So the densification that we're talking about, it's going to bring a lot more bodies in, and most of them 5. We're going to need schools and parks. So is there a plan where, as we're densifying around Bateman, I'm just going to make that up on Talent, are we going to have to also budget for expansion of that school? Or how are we going to start? We want to have parks for people to participate in life in, and the schools. And already the schools are challenged as far as density. Do we have in the plan, we're going to densify this core? That school's already full, the one across from Seven Oaks. How do I double its size, or how do we have that consideration in the OCP? Or
Yeah, excellent question. There's two, I'll touch on the school one first, and then maybe I'll come back to the parks. The school component, right off the top, we're having these same conversations with the school board. We were just in front of the trustees giving the same presentation a couple weeks ago. And we're working with staff there as well to make sure that they're aware of the densities being considered, and we will continue to do so, especially when we get into projecting population growth.
Yeah.
I think the other component is that we know this is 25 years out.
Yeah.
It's not all going to happen overnight. We're only going to experience a certain growth rate, and there will be time to figure out some of that, but it doesn't mean we should wait until crisis is in place to deal with it. So our objective is to keep the school board well informed of where the plan is heading, hear their feedback, and make sure it's on their radar for the planning side. We also recognize through the planning policy that it's not just the school board that wants to do schools. There are private institutions that also want to do schools. So one of the objectives is to clarify what the criteria is for that. We haven't had a lot of guidance for new school sites in the OCP in the past. We're trying to get a bit more specific on that. So hopefully that answers your question around the schools.
well, it's going to be up to the school board, like you're saying,
And the province.
and the
Yeah.
province, of course. Yeah.
But I think
Good
the
luck with that.
information sharing is going to be a critical piece of that.
You said it was only 25 years, and you're going to deal with the province. You better start now.
And we have.
Is that on that microphone? I'm sorry. About the parks.
Parks, yes. So that's one of the parks, similar to utilities. The process will, the last OCP process, and we anticipate this one as well, once complete, will be followed by master plan updates or preparation, and the parks and rec master planning process. We'll be looking at, okay, where are the new density growth areas, or where has it been bumped, and how do we need to respond through various strategies? The strategies allow parks to go into more detail on specifics, topic related specifics. So is it arenas and pools, or is it parks and neighborhood parks? But the OCP will include some higher level guidance around supporting that and thinking about which parts of the city, based on the plan, should we be giving more attention to look at park space. So
Like
when
a
those
new rec
strategies
center,
come
new
forward.
rec center, or a new, that kind of thing as we densify.
The OCP won't get into as much detail saying we need a new rec center here, but would start to highlight where we're going to see more growth and where there's likely to be a parks agriculture need. And then the strategies, I'm pointing to Mitch because he was in
He's
for
stuck in
a
there.
short time. The strategies that from that department would more specifically deal with where, how big, how to cost it, how to phase it, where it's the need first, those types of things. So the OCP will stay high level, but recognize the need.
I just see traffic, parks, rec centers, schools. I know that people are going to want to live here because it's where the people want to live. And as we densify, we need to make sure, because I live in West Abbotsford, and traffic patterns, et cetera, are just completely out of control and lost. Harris Road, the commuter road, got a 3-lane overpass that was built under none of your watch at Mount Lehman. And if we're going to be building the semi-parking on Fraser Highway, that's just going to tie that up. It's just, I decided to look 25 years in advance. It's great.
Yeah, and we have a technical advisory group that includes the various departments and divisions of engineering.
Yeah.
And that's part of this process is when we prepare the new directions and get into the draft, we will be having their eyes on this stuff to understand, are there any, before they even get into the master planning, are there any areas where we might need to pull back a bit or rethink some things? So when we come out with the draft, that first lens will have been put on that.
Thank you.
Comment, and I know I've spoken to city manager as well about PRC And I'm hoping that will be one of the first master plans, because I know we can't do all of them at once, but hopefully that will be one of the priority ones to work on so that we can,
So
I think our community has expressed that to us clearly, and there's a lot of other work being done in different departments too with the aquatic strategy and arena strategy. So I think that it'll all come together, and this has moved very quickly as well. So thanks to staff for doing that. Kim, actually, I'll go online because I saw Craig first with his hand raised, and then Kim's question in here.
Great, thank you. Just great presentation, a lot of breadth. There's a lot to unpack. But I wanted to ask a little bit about just mechanisms that are in place for ensuring affordable housing. Might be too granular, I'm not sure, but just thinking about what specific affordability benchmarks the city might be using to define affordable housing, and thinking specifically not so much as, you know, increasing the availability of rental stock, but enabling new entrants into the housing market at an affordable price point, as opposed to just providing stock for investors. Is there a specific like affordable housing fund, or is there some mechanism in place to developers to incentivize them for that?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Craig. I'm going to take a stab at that, and I'm going to ask Heather to jump in if I've missed any of the critical pieces that we're looking at, because she's been more focused on the housing policy side. So when we think about the continuum, we're going to be looking at our housing needs report to understand where are those key areas that we need to be providing more stock. But overall, increasing the overall supply and opportunity for housing is one of the big moves, is to try and broaden the diversity of housing types, but also vastly increase the potential for new housing opportunities. That's largely market housing, admittedly, but there are opportunities that we're looking at. For example, the non-market housing on place of worship sites. We are thinking about higher level policy statements where opportunities would come up to support things related to co-op housing or other nonprofit type housing. The specifics, I don't know if you wanted to touch on it. I'm drawing a blank on any of the specifics that we are in a position to talk about at this point.
I mean, I think I would just add that, you know, there's a few things. As Ryan said, overall supply is one of the big factors. The fact that we really are short housing units across Canada, and increasing supply is one of the big factors in increasing affordability generally. But in terms of affordable housing, we do have an affordable housing strategy. One of the projects that we assume after the OCP is done is to also update our affordable housing strategy, and that includes more specific detail about implementing items, and that might be things like places of worship, housing on places of worship. It also includes you know, potentially looking at city lands that could accommodate affordable housing, and it includes increasing our partnerships with nonprofit housing providers, and some of the housing policy in our OCP right now, we're looking at enhancing that and looking at all those various things. And that does include things like co-op housing and co-housing and the different options. So right now there isn't a specific defined, you know, what is affordable in terms of, there's a CMHC report that I read recently that indicated that in BC and only BC, 44% is 44% of a household income is affordable. Spending on housing, 44% of housing income spent on housing is affordable, and BC is the only one with that threshold because we've never been able to get below that in terms of affordability. Yeah, so there are various things, there are other strategies, and there are partnerships that we have that we can also improve upon.
And to add to that, thank you, Heather. Some specifics that are on the radar are already in place are things such as parking reductions for rental housing, where we can hopefully increase the viability of those projects, as well as density bonusing. So we have density bonusing in our city center. We've talked about expanding that to the urban centers, but that density bonusing would generate funds that would help go into the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund. So, and then there's the overall strategy of focusing housing along transit, which, while not a direct subsidy, is providing more housing choice, especially over the longer term as that system builds out. And maybe you go from a two-car household to a one-car household or a no-car household, which does affect affordability, but is not directly subsidized by any other third party.
Let me just add one more thing, and this kind of speaks to your question too. You know, at the same time the province put out Bill 44, they also adopted Bill 47, which speaks to, is it 46 or 47? Let's get them mixed up. That allows for us to increase the categories of expenditures that we can spend on DCCs on. So development cost charges can now also be spent on emergency services, for instance, or highway interchanges. And they've also allowed for us to adopt a amenity cost charge bylaw, which allows for rec centers and different cultural things. I know our council is going to be considering that as well. Staff have been working on updates to that. Part of that is with density bonusing is that the any density bonusing money that we get goes specifically to affordable housing. We do have an affordable housing reserve fund. Density bonusing dollars go towards that.
Towards the city building it?
It's an affordable housing reserve fund. The city could do that. Or, that reserve fund is available to nonprofit housing providers as well.
Maybe it's just one little thing, if you could define for everybody, not staff, because they understand density.
Great, yeah, that's an excellent question. So density bonusing is really where a zone would permit up to a certain density without any financial contribution. That would be your as of right density. Typically it's at 2.5 or 2.75. Sorry, it's at 2.75 in the city center. If you want to go higher, you can go all the way up to 5 FSR, provided there's a financial contribution based on the additional floor area being provided, and that financial contribution would go into that reserve fund. So, and typically the numbers are always considered in a way that makes sure it's still viable to do it for the developer so that there is uptake.
Craig, did that answer your question? I just didn't know if you had
Yeah, that's great.
follow-up.
Thanks, folks.
Kim had the next question.
I don't know if it's a question or a comment. So I'm Kim Tominga, for those who don't know me, and I chair the Women's Leadership Council at the Abbotsford Chamber of Commerce. So in that role, I advocate for women in this community. I certainly don't speak for all women, but I advocate for them nonetheless. One of the things that I see is in this densification, but it's already happening today, as young families are getting into usually townhomes or apartments, but there's only space for one vehicle. So they're already down to being a one vehicle family. Often, not in this room necessarily, but generally at a population level, it's the man that takes the car to go to his job, and the woman is beholden to public transit in this city, which I'll give you an example. I mean, Parm, you know, and Craig brought this up, but there's no public transportation to the airport. So the businesses out there can't really hire women. When I worked at Cascade Aerospace, we had women disproportionately, it was women that were declining offers because they just can't get there. I live in East Abbotsford, which, you know, there is some densification going out there, but I have 3 children. One is now out of university, 2 are still in university. I spent my career in aerospace. I'm not a rich woman, but to get them to the university, it is 1 hour and 40 minutes by bus, 2 exchanges, or 13 minutes by car. And so they had to get a car. We have to get them a car. And so it's disproportionate, and she has to insure it. So she is now being disproportionately disadvantaged as a university student because we simply don't have transportation to get her to university. So I just, you know, when we're looking at developing all these things, when we're looking at parks, which are usually built for little kids to use and boys, not girls. Let's face the reality. We exclude girls and young women from those spaces disproportionately. So let's say I'm gonna, because it's a bee in my bonnet, the McMillan Youth Park as an example. 85% of boys skateboard, but only 15% of girls skateboard. So by rights, 15% of the budget to build that should have gone to how girls would skateboard in that park, but it didn't. It went 100% to how boys use the park. And so when we talk about all these things and we're building this OCP and we have the, building intentional communities next week, we need to look at the entire half of the population that is trying to survive in a space that historically has been built for men. And so when we're looking at parks, when we're looking at transportation, which again disproportionately is forcing women to use the transportation, but we can't use it because it doesn't work the way we travel. We drop kids off at daycare, we have to go to the grocery store, then we have to go to work, and then we have to do all these things, doctor's appointments, dentist appointments. Trying to do that on public transportation is impossible in this town. And so I just want to make sure that we're considering all of those things, even if someone isn't raising it in the Let's Talk, because often women have never been asked how they use a space, so they don't have the vernacular to even articulate what they need in a space. And so that's just something, maybe it's not a question, but something to just keep in mind.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it.
Lots of good thoughts there. Thanks for sharing, Kim.
Thank you, Kim. Amazing. Accessibility is so important, and the understanding the different barriers that
Right.
are presented to different communities within the Fraser Valley. And I've lived those experiences, and when I grew up in Fraser Valley, I had to go elsewhere for university
Right.
because there were not transportation opportunities near home. We want to retain our youth. We want our youth and our population to go to the University of Fraser Valley, but it needs to be accessible. It needs to be open to do that. And transportation is critical. The
Right.
cars, the affordability, all of that. Noting the importance of growing our community and retaining talent here in the Fraser Valley, enrollment numbers, we're all aware of what's going on in the international and the federal landscape and how that has impacted, student recruitment and enrollment at all the different universities. Our enrollments domestically are up at UFD, but of course, right now, our international enrollments are down. So it's fluctuating. But for our part, we do have 400 beds opening up next year for new student housing at UFD. But as we try to attract more students, we also need other housing options, whether they be co-op, but they have to be affordable. Transportation and parking are critical.
Right?
I just want to share, I think the chamber, Abbotsford Chamber is putting forward 3 policies this year to the BC Chamber Network where we get an opportunity to advocate for change with the province. And I think I'll highlight a couple of them because they really relate to what we're talking about here. One is around the housing targets that have been imposed on municipalities. We're asking the province to get out of the way, get out of the weeds, and allow, we respect the housing targets, but the heavy regulation on how to do it kind of discards the local municipal context of what the market is, how their OCP is panning out and all that. So we're saying good housing targets, get out of the way, let's get more housing stock to the market. As was mentioned already, we're desperately in need of more supply. And there's another one that has to do with removing barriers for more rental stock as well, but it's kind of getting into the Tenancy Act and the imbalance between landlords and tenants. And that's a juicy one, but not as relevant to this conversation. The third one is the need for more industrial land, right? All the communities in the Fraser Valley, particularly as industries, businesses, people move east, we're seeing huge pressure on our ag lands, on our industrial lands. So the first part of the policy is let's protect what we have. Let's stop converting industrial to residential and other uses. We desperately need more. And then the second part's a little more controversial. It's looking at low-grade, underproducing ag lands and taking that land out to create industrial. And we're citing special area A and B as, where the city of Abbotsford's been looking for years around Gloucester and around the airport. We need those lands, and something has to give in the system that needs to be reworked a bit. So, and the last thing I'll do is put in a plug for building intentional communities, which Kim brought up. Next week, February 26th, Chamber's hosting a large event where we have a good cross-section of developers, contractors, urban planners, where we're talking about how can we build more connected communities, the very things that you were sharing, kind of particularly towards the end of your presentation. The human connection of the social fabric that happens that we need in transportation, in connecting people, and how buildings are positioned with parks and so forth. It's going to be a really interesting conversation. And I would invite, if anybody, maybe I can pass on the invitation to the minutes to be forwarded. If you like, I can pass that invitation on, but I would just encourage you to take a look at that and the conversation. Your own Mark,
He's on the panel.
on the panel speaking about the city's vision.
Get ready for my questions.
In a white shirt. He'll get to echo a lot of your, comments in the presentation, I'm sure, about the vision of some of the special neighborhoods and what we're trying to do here in the community. So looking forward to that. Excellent.
Is there anyone online who had a question or comment? I know that you guys have been quiet, so just thought I'd put there. Doesn't look like anyone has anything to share. So Don, you had a
Two relatively quick ones. Can we start calling them job lands instead of industrial lands? Externally, they have to,
We usually refer to them as employment lands.
employment lands, job lands instead of industrial lands,
Yeah.
because I think that's what we need more than, we're not going to be manufacturing widgets.
No.
And secondarily, maybe the Let's Talk Abbotsford that you're requesting us to get, should everybody that's attending that event should get linked to that?
Yeah.
Or have the questions, have a little booth there where
Mhm.
people can answer the questions
Absolutely.
there, just to collect the data, because there's gonna be a lot of people there with that intention, that mindset.
Through the chair, if you don't mind, I'd love to send some information with Mark. We actually have cards that have a little scan. You can go straight to the
Brilliant.
webpage. Ideally, I wish the timing were a little bit different. We could be actually doing a survey right
Yeah.
now. We're not at that stage. That would be later spring. But if we can get subscribers and get them hooked on the project, that would be incredible. Very good connection. Thank you.
Just a comment to add to that and to Craig's, for this program next week. I unfortunately can't be there. My son's graduating in Calgary, so I'll be in Calgary. And so Craig and I've had some conversations around the panel. And so I hope some of these issues that we've discussed today, percolate during the discussion. If we're thinking about inclusive, intentional communities, it needs to be inclusive. And so I think there's an excellent panel, and we want some of these discussion points to certainly percolate so that we can talk about barriers. We can talk about the challenges. We can talk about accessibility.
Thank you. I don't see there anyone else. There's lots of good feedback to hear, and like you said, if there's anyone who has any questions about what's going on, it is on Let's Talk Abbotsford /OCP. So someone said to me the other day, city never does anything in secret, for sure. Like there's so much information on there. So if you have any questions about what the direction of what, where we're going and what we're trying to get at, it is all there, as you saw from this brief summary. So that's, people are reading it because there were 1,600 written comments. So they're doing the survey and they're sending some feedback. So it is there, but I'm looking forward to seeing how it progresses to the end of the year. So there's no recommendation. So we'll just continue to talk, hopefully within your networks, and share that.
And never apologize for giving us data, because that's what we're here for.
Yeah.
Always
Love data.
You got the wrong crew. You're
Love
apologizing for
data.
data. Love it. Yeah, it's the ones they don't that we grumble out in the hallway after.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good context.
Get up on the data games.
And if we didn't clue in, the report said 90% of our growth is within multi-unit apartments, townhouses, semi-detached. There's only 10% for detached.
That's affordability.
So we are
Yeah.
growing up and not out.
That's good.
So people don't always get that message, but that is what has been. There's no new business. So the final item is just adjournment. Our next meeting is April the 10th. So I'll just ask if someone wants to move that recommendation that this meeting be adjourned. Moved by Craig, seconded by Dawn. All in favor? Any opposed? That motion carries, and we'll see everyone in April. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Patricia.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I do. Yeah, I got a meeting in about 40 minutes.
I did have a question for you.